What is it exactly that is a big existential threat to Israel right now? Well, technically speaking, the nation of Iran has a tremendous amount of deadly arsenal, which they've been building up over the last decades. And they have the sort of extremist ideology that makes them very much a threat to the state of Israel. Now, the question is, will they use their abilities to try to destroy the only state that is effectively a Jewish state in the world, or a state for Jews in the world? Well, it is arguable that they've already tried for decades using low levels of their arsenal and capabilities by sponsoring terror groups, by funding them, by providing them with weapons, by providing them with training. And they've done that with resources like the Iranian Republican Guard, right? It's like they're one of their top military wings. And what they've done with that is they've trained thousands of people in Hezbollah, which is the Lebanese-based terror organization, who have a huge amount of rockets that are frankly far more deadly and accurate and terrifying to anybody on the other end of them. So, in terms of compared to Hamas, so Iran is a threat to Israel, and their proxy group, Hezbollah, which is based primarily in Lebanon, has been engaging in low levels of cross-border attacks back and forth with Israel. Hezbollah shoots something, Israel shoots back something, etc. Hezbollah tries to infiltrate into Gaza, into Israel. The Israeli army chases them, gets them or whatever, but very often it's at a heavy cost in terms of Israel might lose some soldiers trying to get those bad guys out, as has happened in recent weeks. And the level of fire between the two is only increasing in the recent weeks. And unfortunately, as I said before, I don't believe that the leadership in Israel is particularly interested in having this be a short-term war. If they did, well, then there wouldn't be a war happening right now, right? They would have ended it much quicker. Why? Well, historical precedent. The Six-Day War was fought, and you'll say, oh, well, that was conventional armies fighting conventional armies. Sure, that was conventional armies fighting conventional armies. Nevertheless, Israel defeated 6 of those conventional armies, or 7, or whatever the number is, in terms of actual nations that sent, troops and other forces, tanks and airplanes, to try to fight against Israel. And Israel famously preempted their attacks. Nevertheless, there was an act of war. And that act of war ended in 6 days because Israel managed to decimate those other nations' main arsenals, namely their air forces and their tanks, very quickly. We're talking about 1967, when Israel was far less armed and equipped and capable than it is now, and also had far less troops than it has now. So, even if it was against massive conventional, a war between massive conventional forces fighting on kind of traditional battlefield lines, it still was a battle for Israel's existence. And because the armies of the Arabs were bent on destroying the Jewish state, and Israel won within 6 days. Since then, and arguably prior to that, the program began, but since then, Israel has developed a nuclear arsenal. And I say that not to make light of that, that it has that ability and haha, it could use it. No, it is a deterrent force. And there is a reason that nations like Iran and Lebanon and the Palestinians and Syria, other nations that are ostensibly hostile towards Israel, have not tried to do a massive land invasion of Israel since 1973, during the Yom Kippur War, right? When they surprised Israel because the generals of Israel were caught off guard because they were feeling a little bit arrogant about their win from 67, and that spilled over into poor management in the early 70s, and so they didn't take the threats that were very present seriously. And Israel, although it won that war, paid a very heavy price. But since then, Israel has been essentially restrained from winning wars, held back from winning wars by its own political leadership, succumbing to the will of external forces like the United States, France, England, etc. Right? The first signs of that were in 1956, during the Sinai campaign, when the United States didn't like the fact that the British and the Israelis and the French had basically taken over the Sinai in order to free the Suez Canal from Gamal Abdel Nasser, who had made it impossible for the British and the French and other nations to use the Suez Canal because he didn't like them, and he said they were colonialists, etc. So Israel essentially did a favor to the British and the French. And also, it was a matter of arguably defense for themselves, because the Suez Canal is vital for trade going through the Suez, including for Israel. And that was important for oil trade. And so the Israelis, French, and Americans, British, fought against the Arabs of Egypt and took control of the Suez Canal, only to have the Americans drive them out politically by saying, no, you can't keep this. Yes, Nasser has to open the Suez, but you have to relinquish control of the land victory that you've just made. And that was the first time since Israel was reborn, that Israel has been held back from keeping a victory, and it was prevented basically from having a victory. Since then, we've seen that been repeated in the war in Lebanon in the early 80s, and also in the Intifada, where it became a long, protracted, low-level violent conflict for many years, and then in the second Intifada, and in many wars with Hamas ever since.